Well, if I was giving a new PhD student a reading list on music and technology and the future, here it would be. So now's your chance. Perhaps we have questions from among the panel. Thank you for all these wonderful, stimulating, informing contributions. It struck me that the difficulty is not getting computers or machines to do clever stuff. It's getting people to change their mental models. It's a much longer term project. But perhaps there are questions. Jim?
Yeah. Sure, thank you. Actually, it's a question for Marek because it's already been asked. It's probably worth asking again, which is where does live music fit into this? And the reason I ask really is because I was speaking to somebody else at the break, and really there is something. Someone mentioned also the word irreducible earlier on. There is something irreducible about sound waves being produced not by a stereo, but by an actual person, and that might be that might involve some electronic help. But I'm also thinking of just completely acoustic sound waves hitting you, and what that does to you, and how important it is. At least, for everyone actually, not just those of us who call ourselves musicians.
You just prompted like one of the most depressing realizations that I've had, which, as you can tell, I'm pretty depressed already. So like that's a pretty good accomplishment. Like, when was the last time I went to a concert that wasn't mediated by speaker systems? I don't know, man. That's a hard one for me. I will say like live music has gotten interesting. I agree with like what Jennifer said about like, the only thing that I'm saying is like Gen Z is also lonely. Like they kind of don't go out, you know, like, and I agree, maybe they'll, you know, also get lonely enough that they will go out, but they're more likely to like log onto a Roblox server and like watch a kind of like live stream music related event, which is like a very much kind of a cool thing that's happening right now. Or, you know, especially on like, you know, massive multiplayer, like online games as a service, you will get a whole bunch of people together and there will be something that is, I think it will really freak you out. I would love to send this to you, like a total simulacrum of what a live music event is, with almost no music being constructed, but with dancing, with people on stage, with flags and banners and all kinds of stuff to wave around. So I can see like further, I can also see that largely in the future being populated largely by bots or something. Like I can see that as also being a thing. But yeah, the question about live acoustic sound, I mean, yeah, that's a real tough one. I don't know. I'd like to represent the hard-edged opinion here and say like most of the live music that I would see on an acoustic guitar would be something that someone is playing on a street corner with their partner filming them for Instagram, and that would be the way that it's ultimately consumed. Sorry, but it's I just want to be clear, I love music, but can I ask a question to the crew? Like I kind of had we talk a lot about like easiness and like how easy Suno and UDR and like easiness of interface and all kinds of stuff like that. But like it's cool that like the one it's interesting that the one thing that we didn't talk about is the fact that like, you know, what goes into a massive, you know, series of transformer models like UDO and Suno or any kind of like generative AI is like a tremendous amount of compute, and a tremendous amount of compute that's obviously like based in like to use your word, a tremendous amount of like very real extraction, not just in terms of like, I don't know, like ChatGPT is like a bottle of water for a prompt or something like that. And I'm just thinking about like all the lithium that's being extracted in order to like power all these things. Like that's kind of sad. I guess like, yeah. I'm really, yeah. So maybe can you help me? Can you help me, Laetitia? No, but like that's. I just found it really interesting we didn't talk about that. Like, do you guys have a? I feel like Jennifer probably has a feeling about this, but I don't know. Does anyone else have a feeling about like that's the one thing that's changed. Like the scale of extraction has changed to such an unbelievable degree that it's kind of incomprehensible. Yeah, that supports. Anyway, sorry.
You know, shit. It's got the microphone.
Read in the Register a couple of days ago that, and this is true, you know, for $5 you can build a computer to do something. It'll have a full-on operating system and a couple of gigs of storage and everything. So we're not far from a point where there will be a single-use computer. You'll actually make a computer to do a particular task, and it'll do it, and then you'll throw it away.
You already have. It's good for my iPhone out.
Yeah, well, that was a bit more expensive, but when it really gets down to like throwaway level, then we will actually have purpose-built computers that will solve a particular problem, maybe play a particular piece of music, and then maybe play a particular piece of live music involving live humans, and then you'll toss it and buy another one and play the next piece.
But there are real examples. A Hallmark card that has a tiny chip in it. It's great to be great only once when you open it, but it has a tiny chip inside it, and it do it.
Okay, so this is not even news, is it?
You mic controls and stuff. You need to bad those. Yeah.
That's right.
Did you say extraction? Could you say that? Because I'm sorry, I missed that rehearsing, but what is that extraction process?
I guess like on a couple of different levels, like you could start all the way in the ground, right, to pull the various components, rare earth metals, things like that go into GPUs and go into smartphones, computers, all the kinds of like more interfacial components. But like that's extraction that's, devastated the Congo, Chile in a number of different ways. So that's real like extraction. But then of course there's like the extraction that goes to, produce the energy ultimately that powers, massive server farms that are all over the world that go to, go behind AWS data centers that are, powering TPUs and GPUs all over the place at scale. Like, yeah, is that, did I use the word wrong or something? Or
No, I thought you were talking about the process by which these corporations produce AI machines that can produce music, and what they generally do is they feed on the existing internet and all the genres that have existed, and they extract. And that's a form of extractivism, it seems to me. But I mean, I thought that's what you were talking about, because the others we kind of know about, but this one, is it fair to say that that's a form of extractivism as well?
I loved like Laetitia's talk. You talked about mining and extraction, and like that was mining. Yeah.
It's actually a term used, feature extractions. When you create models, you extract features from whatever it is that you're using to drive your models.
I mean, you give it a prompt, and it's got, you don't even have a model. These people don't have models. They say, well, I want it to sound like this. I want you to say shit. And then like, that's not a model. The machine is doing that, and it's doing that by scouring the internet. And that seems like a form of extractivism.
It is, yeah.
So I mean, like, but I don't know, maybe that's benign. People don't have a problem with that, but maybe it has to be kind of recognized. And
I think it is, and I think we use the same images that we use in our the same vocabulary that we use, some kind of mirror, also the real material world. We're just repeating it, but in more like this kind of conceptual, or not conceptual, just how we use how we talk about things. That's how we talk about extracting and mining, and we also do that in the actual world, right? So it's the same. It's just kind of replicating the same vision we have of of our relationship to reality, right? No?
Would that be seen as a form of compression? That what you're taking is like a musical culture, a cultural situation, or whatever medium you're talking about, and you compress it. That's in effect what this kind of extraction does, which, it strikes me, in my innocent ignorance, relates to a sort of, it's the counterpart to a cult of individualism, where everyone has to be creative and novelty has to be in everything, and gives the lie to it at the same time. Mm. And what the combination of these things do, actually, the risk there is that they become a brake to development. It's, before Barad, is slow cancellation of the future. You get stuck then at that point, then movement, cultural movement, whatever inadequate term you want to use, is then retarded by this, because the individualism prevents any local social cohesion in terms of developing things. At the same time, the compression fixes a state of of cultural development at a certain point, so that you end up with, I mean, it's, this beautiful passage from Zamyatin. Who was talking about, you're talking about science fiction.
Me?
Who was talking about science fiction? You know Zamyatin?
Zamyatin, yeah.
Yeah. And the music generating machine. In fact, musicians appear in all of his books. But the music generating machine, without the pain of producing a sonata.
He was a particular, Zamyatin, Steve Lacy really liked Zamyatin. But what I heard was your last talk. I'm sorry I didn't hear any more of Mark, but I mean, the last moment of it seemed, like you said, it seemed depressing or whatever. And I just thought the only recourse is, resistance is futile and abject surrender. Is that what we're headed for?
Roberto, do you want to answer that? You kind of sucked in the air. Like that was like a good, like, you don't want to? That's a good one. No, I don't think so. I think what I was kind of, like, I agree, like exactly what Jonathan said. There's this slow cancellation of the future that's happening. But I think there are different scales at which one can engage with music, right? And I think that there's a lot of creative, that word really bothers me, but there's a lot of like interesting opportunity to build structures at higher and higher scales. And that's where I see I would love artists to be more kind of present in those spaces, because I think that we do have kind of unique and distinct agencies, right? So it's not about surrender, but I think it's about being tactical and moving up a level. That's kind of how I feel.
Now, when you say tactical, not tactile, tactical. So, I wish I'd seen. Let me not say anything because I just want to. I missed it all. So thank you. That's get this back.
And what about the technical in music? A lot of the exhibition is to do with the ways in which music becomes a technical construction, a technical thing to do, right? You don't start with a nice sound and then think, oh, what nice sound would come next. On some level, I loved George's reference to the cliche of spontaneity, right? No one practices like an improviser. There are networks of technicity, whatever you want to call it, going on there. Do you think this is adequately represented in the way we discuss music? The sort of, again, the cliche of expression. I'm not suggesting that it's not expressive. For heaven's sake, it's the most meaningful thing to me. But the idea that it emerges from the contact with some higher entity, as opposed to human decision making.
There's a very interesting blind spots in Udio and Suno. It's been trained on, let's say, the entire collection of music on YouTube, released by labels. If you type in like Rachmaninoff sonata or some kind of indication like a piano sonata, you'll get something that sounds produced, polished, very well played. If you type in a nervous piano student at a recital, right, beginning piano student, they will not sound like a nervous piano student. It will sound very virtuosic. It's because the data that it's been trained on is only polished, virtuosic performances. So the technical is there, present in these models implicitly. And when you only try to tease out these other kinds of edge cases, invariably most of the world's music is made by people that aren't as practiced as the ones we hear in the concert hall. But they're totally unable to imitate this because it's a big blind spot in their data set.
It's very interesting. Thanks. There were questions from the floor. Adam. I'm sorry. Push. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think there's something interesting here that I relate to Laetitia's work and Alexandra and Jennifer as well. Being a performer myself, I'm looking at the relationship between music and technology and so on. Musical instruments in themselves are quite interesting technological entities. So myself, I play the violin. It seems like a standard kind of instrument. It's actually a quite advanced piece of technology. It took a while to develop something that sounds that way, and it's something that takes time to learn. But I think that, and answering the question that you were asking before, there seems to be a focus, and this goes back to what I was trying to point out in my presentation, on the compositional dimension of music. Music as organized sound, without taking into account that the instrumental dimension of music is already quite an advanced form of technology that is kind of left out of the question of the equation to some extent. And I think that there's a gap there as to how this might end up being integrated or not into musical practices in general.
That's an interesting point. I note with the multiple representations of a single, it's a Schubert impromptu there, all of them require some kind of instrument in order to then return to the state of music. I mean, even if the instrument is a digital channel converter or whatever. But they assume some further stage.
I had this earlier at the tip of my tongue, but I will try to bring it back. It was a question to maybe Marek, back to your speech. Is this depression when you I mean,
It's like logical depression.
no, of course, but is this way of looking at music in a kind of Mortonian hyper-object way, as in music is a kind of hyper-object, so from the time we started making music, the end of music in that sense was already envisioned, and we are just following with thinking of AI terms to the end of music as a end of this hyper object. But then is this because the way we're training AI models, meaning if we're training AI models to explore some latent spaces, let's say, of particular music that the models were trained on, but if we see music as what type of problem it is, it may be the space of possibilities of what can happen musically is not only limited to what it was trained on. Meaning, like, you could if you started exploring how huge the problem is in itself, it's so huge, you could take the whole lifespan of humanity by using the fastest supercomputer, and still we wouldn't generate all the possibilities of that space. So are we not falling into a trap of thinking we are going into the kind of exploration of a finished space of possibilities because we are looking at latent spaces instead of spaces of possibilities? That was, it is actually a question, but
that's a really good question.
But that was my thought immediately when hearing your speech.
I think so. First, like, I really like the idea of hyperobject to me is like a complicated term because it has this like Kantian relationship to something that is separate from you, and you just are like, wow, it's so big and I can't touch it. And I think it's more, music is, we are able to touch it. We're able to move within it. Like we are very much enmeshed within the hyperobject in a kind of, there is some agency afforded to us. But I also agree that like, that is what music is. Like, of course, like totally agreed. And now we have the ability to, through like extractive processes that are at a scale that is mind-blowing, we're actually able to really kind of work with it in that way. It's like kind of being brought down from hyperobject status to this like, this apprehendable and engageable thing. And I'm not saying that translated version of music is music, but it is what music has become or how it functions socially. And oftentimes it becomes quite useful to use those terms interchangeably. And there's like another kind of order of descent here, which has to do with the fact, or whatever, I guess the provocation that we are engaging with music more as a kind of representational object, at very least in the kind of marketplaces that music is transmitted, than as something kind of noumenal, something like, wow, like I'm experiencing it as like a material thing in front of me. Like there's this third order of compression, to use Jonathan's terminology, that like that's where we start to get from real big to kind of big-ish to this kind of receding differential space where once you start to engage with that referential space through a mediated application of platforms, like you can hit the bottom of the platform really easily. Like I very much encourage you. Jennifer and I were talking about like going on Midjourney like newbie channels. Like you can get a really solid understanding of Midjourney very quickly. It's not that hard because there's so much sedimentation and reuptake and feedback that's going into this thing that that's.
Peace.
I'm also a little bit depressed, I have to say, for all other reason probably. But I came to the conference because I was fascinated by the model of Yanis Xenakis and Le Corbusier. And so it's very 20th century, these two geniuses produced this. And then I came, and then we have Spotify and the mainstream is, and there is this kind of IKEA bias, where the mainstream is kind of extremely dominant, and it becomes, in my view, and that's the question, because I find it a little bit fascist, in an Adorno style, it becomes very dominant, and it's a monopole, And as soon, there is this kind of mainstreamish, dominant, ambiental music that dominates everything, and after a while, people, and that I find also a little bit of fascist attitude, they have enough of that and they begin with gardening, pottery, hands-on, feeling, naked walking on sand and all these kind of, so this huge technologic upbringing and all is in clouds and nothing involves of that, only mainstream. There is no satisfaction. There is no original genius, a la Xenakis, no? And then we go back to pottery, planting rosemary and all this kind of. Do you mean what I understand? What I mean? So I would like to ask Jennifer what because it's a political problem, no? It's that's.
I should say, like, as an Irish person, I live with cognitive dissonance where, the end is near, but life's still pretty weird and amazing. And so I think my depression is just that I think that there are other models. Like, I think Ted Nelson offered a vision for what the internet could be, and do you know what I mean? What compensation could be, and sort of what micropayments could be. We didn't go down that timeline, So there have been people historically that have come up with other ideas for how we might do things. I would say that if, for example, there was a communal trust where all musicians could say, well, my data is in there, and people can use it to train things, and I get a little bit of the profit. Like, that would be fantastic if there was like a functioning commons, or if we had universal basic income, so there was a guarantee that artists could pay the rent. In Ireland, we've just had a UBI experiment. After the pandemic, the government decided to trial UBI with artists in Ireland, and it was a very fair application. They said as long as you qualify, and it's arts workers, so not just producers, like lighting technicians, sound engineers, everything. And they used a lottery system to pick people. And then all these sociologists did a study on them, and they said to everybody, has it helped? And everybody was like, yes. I knew where my rent was coming from. Like it was fine. So I can see these sort of green shoots where there's like different models or different sort of ways of thinking about what it could be. In the same way that I could imagine if, for example, all of my medical data, or all of us in the NHS whose medical data is sucked into the app, if, there was some sort of, we knew that like that's going to fund the NHS, or if they sell that to drug companies, that means we're going to get the drugs for cheaper, then you sort of think, okay, well, maybe that's sort of a good trade-off. So I do think that there are models, and different people, like I said, Ted Nelson was trying to develop different models for how the internet would function. So I think it's more that
what I think the problem is just there's a lack of, like we used to talk about digital literacy, and I used to go to the library near where my father lives, and they would teach people in their 70s how to use the internet in the Silver Surfers Club and how to rotate PDFs and, you know, attach something to an email. And I thought, this is really amazing. These people who did not, you know, grow up with this technology are trying to learn. And the number one thing I stress with my students is just try to be aware. Do you know what I mean? Just try to be aware of what's going on. And you can still play in the darkness. Do you know what I mean? You can use Udio and Suno and you can play around and see what their limits are and try to get them to sound nervous, you know, or things like that. But like, just try to educate yourself, because it's very overwhelming. All of us have these computers in our pockets which outstrip what they sent, you know, people to the moon with. And sort of that should be the capability for immense deep human joy. Do you know? So the more we're aware of it, the more we have a chance to like look for the joy.
There's a question from Roth. Yeah.
So this is a question from the live stream. Given the existence of blind spots and edge cases within existing LLMs, large language models, I'm assuming, do the panel see it as their role to retrain the model by providing other smaller data sets, or is it best to leave it open?
I would love to submit my piano recordings to be considered as training material. No, I don't think it's my responsibility to give corporations even more data. Really?
I'm trying to remember the quote, Benjamin Bratton. He said it on our podcast. He said, we need to put it all in, all of it. We need to put all of it in. I think that's, yeah. I mean, because the more kind of, you know, the less that is there, the more kind of heavily edited and curated and, you know, combed for things like bias, the less actually representative it is of the real world, which is, going back to Depression Land, you know, pretty rough place.
I think, I mean, there's a question here as to, I don't know if that question relates to this, but AI, as we engage with it, unless you're actually doing programming and playing around with models and so on, it's, I think, 100% a commercial enterprise. So this is people trying to make money full stop, which is fine, I guess, in a way. So it's not about computer science and so on. If you train your own models, you modify them and so on, that's okay. But if you use the commercial interfaces, you're part of a game that has nothing to do with knowledge or expansion of what is humanly possible and so on, but with making money. If it's not profitable, they'll close it. So my guess is that eventually, probably sadly, the models will move into a more personalized experience where people are able to say, okay, ChatGPT, make it sound more like me. Here you have some texts. I mean, that's happening already. And my students are using that. And I think that's dangerous and I guess in a way interesting, but from a commercial point of view, it probably makes sense for the companies that are running the show. Yeah.
All best.
No, I don't agree with that either. I mean, most of people who do AI research, yes, some of them have high salaries, it's true, but they want to solve big problems like solving cancer, like thermonuclear fusion, which would solve the climate change issue if it worked, and it's likely it will, thanks to AI, like solving hard mathematical problems and so on. So I don't agree. I mean, the mystery to me is why, when we talk about AI, there is always this anti-capitalist stream that has to be there. I agree, it's maybe some kind of sign of depression. It's possible, but I think that there are so many exciting opportunities with this AI. It's overwhelming what the great things you can do. And so, of course, there are problems with with that we have been talking about here. But come on, solving cancer. What about and the list is infinite of the things that you can do with these models. And another thing I wanted to say also is that you guys seem to know actually much more than I do, because in my opinion, I think I know pretty well how transformers work, but honestly, I don't really understand. And I don't think anyone really understands the limits of these things. And the people who have actually developed these algorithms themselves, they did not expect ChatGPT to work that well, and all the other applications. I think we are faced with algorithms of a new kind, and it will take time for everyone to really understand how they work. I think everyone here understands more or less how Google works, more or less. You know, it crawls pages, it indexes them, and then okay. But transformers, come on now. Who understands really what they do, how they work, what are their limits? Of course, they have limits. We have talked about the limits, but we don't know these limits. Everyone says it's just about replicating, imitating style. Yes, it is. But what is the limit of this? I mean, do humans do anything more than that? Actually, we don't know. I mean, we are in a big interrogation, moment. As we say in French, it's urgent to wait.
Thanks, Jennifer.
I was going to say, I agree with you that there's many use cases where AI can make a massive difference. So I think about Constance Lehmann and Regina Barzilay, who are two cancer researchers based at MIT and Harvard, who are currently working on using AI to predict early onset of cancer from mammograms. So if their work is successful, it has the potential basically to touch the lives of every single person in this room, every single person on Earth. But what and so for that reason, I wish that all the money that was funneled into Midjourney so that people could try and generate pictures of boobs, went to people who were actually analyzing mammograms. That's my feeling. The other problem that I have is that I see so many people being the victims of their images being taken and AI generating deep fakes, generating pornographic images of them. I've spent a lot of time looking at the images that are being generated on a lot of not safe for work websites. So I see like an entire generation of young people who think that an image of a naked woman is like part anime, part pornography, part AI generated. And so I see a cultural change coming. And that's what worries me, because in the same time that I would happily cancel all of those services and funnel that money across, to the cancer researchers. But the commercial interests, are not focused on the healthcare space as much as they are on these sort of these sort of meme generative things that allow anybody to create a deep fake of somebody else. So that's where my concern is.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question from the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I think that also goes to Mark. This pessimistic view on Gen Z or Alpha or whatever in terms of the role of live music and concerts. And I think it's rather pessimistic believing that an acoustic guitar will mainly play a role of someone sitting in the street being filmed for an Instagram account. First of all, because I don't know where this strong belief comes from that everyone wants to spend all his time in the digital world. I mean, every trend has also counter trends. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people will be fed up and very tired of spending all their life in mobile devices and in a virtual world. So there will be a big wish, I guess, for exactly that, the human factor, sharing live experiences with others, because it's about emotion, it's about the moment, and something which is then also gone after this moment is gone. And I was curious if there is any reliable data and research on the fact that Gen Z is less interested in spending times in concerts, etc. Because right now we can see the opposite. I mean, the only business in the so-called music industry which is really growing and earning money is the live industry. And when I look at my own kids being 12 and 9, I mean, this generation is running into concerts like crazy, buying merch. And I mean, my daughter started way earlier than myself going to live concerts. And this whole discussion about youth culture is not expressed anymore in a musical way.
I can't agree as long as I look into my own bubble. So of course I'm working in the so-called music industry, and so my kids are to a certain extent influenced, etc. But I don't really get where this pessimism comes from, that the live sensation of a concert doesn't play a role anymore in our, let's say, ritual of being human beings. And yeah, so is there any data or articles or books to read more about where this future perspective comes from when it comes to live concert experiences? And that's my question.
Yeah, I mean, the point about the concerts, I was reacting to Jennifer's talk, so I am assuming that, perhaps you can weigh in there. But yeah, I mean, I can definitely send you some content on the way in which Gen Z subjectivity is changing, kind of in a really serious way. I think. I mean, it's still early yet, but it does seem to be constructed differently than the obviously I'm lapsing into a kind of generationalism, but subjectivity is changing. I mean, that's something that I feel is very kind of easy to substantiate. That there's been, in fact, we have a book on this that I'd be happy to provide you. And so part of what we've been writing about is the relationship between the kind of quantization of experience and subjectivity, and how those two things kind of, as they wrap into each other in a kind of accelerating feedback loop, have led to a much less of a kind of, it's like hyper-individuation that has gone kind of beyond some threshold, so that there no longer is any kind of fixity like there was. And especially, I called up Gen X as a reference to new models. Happy to send you that particular reference. Gen X being, the MTV generation, where obviously that's where really a kind of like hyper-individualized subjectivity as a commercial object was, bought and sold at scale in a really kind of notable way. And, we had a kind of downstream, me as a millennial had a kind of downstream inheritance of that. And I can send you a number of papers, if you want to read Do Not Research. That's a nice, obviously not a very good name for that question, but it's a very good, it's run by Joshua Citarella, who does a lot of research into Gen Z and Gen Alpha political formations. And you'll see a kind of hyper fragmentation of subjectivity. So gone beyond some threshold at which subjectivity is recognizable, and things become very atomic, very weird, very fissile, very transient. It's not about a relationship to specific objects that are, I grew up with a very specific series of bands and musical objects that formed my identity. And now, I mean, according to a lot of this content, it's a lot more, actually, Jennifer put this word really nicely over dinner last night. It's a lot more confused now, which I think is true.
I can say as a silver surfer working musician, the first 2 decades of my professional life were basically funded by the recording industry. And that essentially collapsed as the kind of economic force it was. Now, the money hasn't been replaced. That is what musicians actually get, how they eat. That's problematic. But the interest in live music, in the particularities of live performance, I would say has increased. And this has been liberating, I think, for musicians in all genres of music. Rather than releasing authoritative versions, they're creating performances that have their own qualities, and I think audiences are engaging with this. I'm left feeling very optimistic that in these challenging and exciting times, we've got people like this presenting challenging and exciting ideas to us. So I'd like to thank them all for their contributions to this wonderful day. Thank you. And of course, we'll see you all at George and Jennifer's wonderful concert this evening. But before we go, on behalf of the curators, Paul, Martin, and myself, I'd really especially like to thank the wonderful team here at EPFL Pavilions, because their professionalism, wisdom, and above all patience has been invaluable and a joy. So thank you. We'll see you all this evening.